Union, as part of what we have acted as the joint response of these three institutions to support the Latin American region in the COVID response and in the future of after this crisis. These dialogues, in particular, like the webinar we have today, try to be technical experts to discuss what a critical challenge of the region, which is how to expand social protection, which is an issue that the region has been trying to do for several years. And it has obviously a very challenging context because, as you know very well, this has very important financial implications. So the idea of this project that we are conducting with the EU is precisely to give some alternatives and to discuss very clearly what are the trade-offs that different countries in Latin America have to expand the financing of social protection. After giving the floor to Mark Litvin from the European Union, that will give the first setting from the European Union, we will have 2 rounds of discussion about 2 of the questions that you saw are in our agenda. The question says, one of the lessons of the pandemic is the need to develop social protection mechanisms for all, rather than being limited to workers who can contribute to the system, who typically are employed in the formal sector. So we will have 2 rounds of discussion. The first would be what has been the recent experience in the region, what are the challenges that it has highlighted, how are the options for policymakers to act in this context. And then the second one, and we want to hear from the experience of the countries that are with us, what is the best way to finance the expansion of social protection systems in a context of high informality and with limited fiscal space. So with that brief introduction, I leave the floor to Mark, who will give us some opening the OECD. Mark, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, José Antonio. Thank you very much for the opportunity for you and all your team for organizing the event. Good morning to everybody in Latin America. Good afternoon for the people on this side of the Atlantic. I will be very brief, among other things, because I think there is things much more important than listening to me. And then there is a very important people knowing much better the topics. Among them, Jens Arnold, of course, Deputy Head of Division at the Economic Department of the OECD, which is in charge of setting the scene of the event, to a number of panelists knowing the subject quite well, and my dear friend Sebastian, because he will jointly with Jens making the closing remark. My thanks from the European Union for all your participation today to this webinar. I will not be able to stay with you today because I received a last-minute call from management, and I will have to leave. But despite that, I will let somebody listening to the event. This event is particularly interesting and important for us. The relevance of the questions that are going to be posed to the panelists and the topic will certainly positively serve to feed the project content that is financed by our Facility of Development in Transition. In this framework, the EU is supporting social protection related to geographical envelope in 29 partner countries with a volume of 1.7 billion euro, 50% of it through budget support, but 50% of it through program approach. It's worth to notice that our thematic envelope has a flagship program called Improving Synergies between Social Protection and Public Finance Management that provide key on sectors public finance management, a key element for the equilibrium of social protection. Also, in particular in Latin America, we provide support to a peer-to-peer technical assistance, socio, and also the well-known Eurosocial. In the core of the aim is to help to improve policy coherence in the design and financing of social protection systems, a better implementation, better monitoring, and making social protection more shock resilient, in particular in the context of the follow-up of this pandemic. We want social protection better linked more with other Commission's geopolitical priorities. We want social protection more represented in human development in priority areas in our multi-annual indicative program or in Team Europe initiative under discussion within the region. In this framework, we want to ensure that we will use all our tools, such as the EU Development and Transition Facility, to ensure that the discussion on social protection will be properly framed on the correct debate that public policy move forward according to the commitment that all of us have support to the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much. Have a fruitful discussions. Up to you, and thank you, José Antonio.
Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you really for the support of the European Union to this project and to the whole set of projects that we are organizing and the number of events that we are organizing. At the end of the webinar, I will talk about some of the other events. I hope that many people can join the others. So now I leave the floor to Jens Arnold to set the scene of what is the discussion of this project, and then we will open the discussion to our guests.
Thank you very much, José Antonio. Just to check, can you see my screen now? Is the PowerPoint visible?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so thank you very much, José Antonio. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you particularly to all our expert attendants. We are very much grateful for this opportunity to discuss this project here today. And we are very much looking forward to your inputs and comments on the ideas that we are discussing today here. Obviously, this is an event that is taking place at the very beginning of the project, so we don't have any results to present. The idea is really just to outline what is the motivation behind this project and why we want to work on these issues. So this project is clearly inspired by what we witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic, even though the underlying challenges are not new. And the kind of approaches that we want to bring forward here are not entirely new either, but I think the experience of the last year gives them a new flavor. So let me start with this first slide. I only have 4 of them, so it'll be quick. When lockdown started in Latin America, many people saw their incomes decline and their day-to-day subsistence threatened. And some of those had been poor before, but others not. And those that fell into poverty were often engaged in informal activities. As a result of this, existing social protection networks were overwhelmed and had to be complemented by new measures. Many countries indeed were remarkably quick in setting up emergency benefits. So in a sense, the pandemic has simply reinforced pre-existing challenges in the region, among which is first and foremost labor informality. And this is the chart here where you see that with significant difference across countries in the region, somewhere between 1/3 and 4/5 of the income earners are in informal labor situations in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, this in turn implies that many people, significant shares of the population, are left out of existing social protection mechanisms many of which, not all, but many of which are tied to participation in the formal labor market. So, for example, we see that significant shares of the elderly are left without any kind of old age benefit in a number of Latin American countries, and even less people have access to unemployment insurance. Now, labor informality is, of course, a multidimensional problem, and it also has more than one reason. Firm informality, for example, has been mentioned in this context, and also low levels of productivity and education, with which there's, of course, a circular causal relationship where it's not evident at first sight into which direction the causality goes. But one element that is certainly playing into this equation is the cost of formal employment in many Latin American economies. And here in this chart, we're showing only the percentage that mandatory contributions levied on salaried labor add to overall labor costs. And you can see that this ranges from 10%, but goes up very quickly to levels close to 50%. So we have fairly high labor charges in Latin American countries. These high labor charges add to labor costs. Obviously, they are not the only thing that determines labor costs. We also have, in some countries in the region, minimum wages that are relatively close to median wages. We also have other non-wage labor costs, like, for example, those related to severance payments or tedious labor regulations. But these high charges on labor are clearly one element of the equation here. And these high charges on formal labor are there because they finance social security benefits for formal workers. Now, at the same time, they also make formal employment more expensive. And by doing so, they create disincentives for formal work. And they add to the other cost drivers that to differing extents exist across Latin American economies, like severance payments, minimum wages, or regulations. As a result of this situation, many economies in LAC are trapped in an undesirable equilibrium, where in fact much of the population is excluded from formal social protection mechanism. And we have this sort of dual setup of social protection, which bears some resemblance to an insiders versus outsiders problem. So you can have constellations where increases in formal labor market social protection actually have regressive effects because they will add to labor costs and they will exclude more people from participating in the formal labor market and the kind of social protection benefits that come with that. And of course, the same relation could hold in the other direction as well. Now, social security benefits that are tied to formal labor market participation are, of course, not the only kind of social protection programs that are out there. Many Latin American countries have set up and improved social assistance programs, which are non-contributory, and many of them benefit also informal workers. But one thing that we've learned from the pandemic is that these programs are really insufficient. They are insufficient because of the coverage that they have. In fact, large shares of the population in many countries are still left out without any protection at all. And they are also insufficient in the sense that they can be quickly changed. They do not constitute any rights. And they are sort of not enshrined in the legal framework that underlies social security in the formal sector. At the same time, these social assistance programs, the non-contributory benefits, can in some constellations even add further to the disincentives for formal work because they provide benefits that have, prior to their introduction, been reserved only to those participating in the formal labor market. So what we want to do here in this project against this background is we want to start some thinking about exploring alternative funding sources to improve incentives for formal job creation. We want to consider a shift towards general taxation revenues for financing at least some parts of social protection, with a clear focus on how this would affect incentives, particularly in the lower income ranges, which in many countries, the most relevant part of that would be close to the minimum wage. We think that this is also a potential opportunity for more redistribution through taxes and transfer. It presents a chance to unify some elements of basic protection mechanisms for formal and informal income earners. And obviously, it is not fraught without political challenges, and we know that very much. This is a large reform. It's not a small parametric reform of some element of the system. This would have overwhelming effects for the system as a whole. But if there's ever been a chance to think about this, then I think it is in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, with all the deficiencies of existing social security systems or social protection systems that the pandemic has shown us. So in this context, we want to think a bit about how financing can be changed, for what part of social protection networks this applies, what would be the fiscal costs, the benefits in terms of both reductions in poverty and reductions in inequality. How should the interactions between non-contributory and contributory elements work out? What are the potential pitfalls, if there are any? And here we'd like to very much draw on country experience. And how can we, in the whole setup, make sure that incentives for formalization are strengthened through reforms in social protection financing? And with this, I want to conclude, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jens. So, well, as you see, this is a fascinating topic, a very topic that I assume countries in the region are precisely evaluating at this moment. The two questions that we have, one is a bit more on recent experience in the region. So I suggest that we give the floor first to the countries that are here with us to hear about how they have been coping with these different pillars sometimes of social protection and what they have been doing in the pandemic and things like that. We also give the floor to some of our experts from different institutions, but to keep this first question of what has been the recent experience in the region, what are the challenges that it has highlighted, and how are the options for policymakers to act in this context. And then in a second round, after 5 p.m. Europe time, we move to the second part, which is this issue, this question that James was asking about how to finance this expansion. So keep that discussion for the second round. And in that round, probably we give the floor first to our experts from academia and institutions, and then to the countries. And with that, we close. So if you agree, then let's give the floor to our three countries. We have Luciana Perez, Chief Cabinet of the National Secretariat for Citizens Income, SENARC in Brazil. Thank you, Luciana, for being with us.
Thank you. So this is good morning in Brazil, so good afternoon in Europe. And on behalf of the Brazilian Ministry of Citizenship, I'd like to contribute to the discussion, especially regarding the first question, to the recent experience that we have on the emergency aid as the major policy in the social protection field to face the effects of the pandemics regarding the most vulnerable population and the impacts of this policy on the need to improve and expand the social protection system in a post-pandemic context. So just in a nutshell, it's important to stress that Brazilian protection social system consists in a vast offer of constitutional benefits that cover both contributory benefits for people active in the labor market, for instance, unemployment insurance, but also for those who are inactive, old age and disability pensions, sickness and work injury benefits, but also non-contributory benefits for people inactive in the labor market, social assistance benefit for elderly or disabled persons, for instance. But there was a gap on non-contributory benefits to cover active people that still face severe dimensions of poverty and extreme poverty. And to fill this gap, Brazil have a conditional cash transfer, which is the Bolsa Família program for 17 years now. And as a conditional cash transfer that aims to improve the living condition of families in poverty and extreme poverty, the federal government makes monthly transfer of financial resources to beneficiaries' family, which in turn fulfill commitments in the areas of health and education, thus accessing social rights and fostering social inclusion. So it is important that in this constitutional benefits in the protection system as it is stated in Brazil, this gap, it's very important to be fulfilled by the Bolsa Família program as cash transfer program. And now, in order to mitigate the effects of the pandemics and due to the efficient management of the consolidated social protection system that we have regarding the single registry, that it is all the data that we have for social assistance programs in Brazil inside the Ministry of Citizenship, we could, with this consolidated social protection system and a political will, we had a quick and effective response to strengthening social policy in a critical period. For instance, the emergency aid was a rapid response, not only because it was its operationalization was organized in a very short time. The first payments were made 6 days after the approval of the emergency aid law within the Congress. So it is important to state also that is a judiciary, the legislative and the executive branch working all together, since we had to pass the law, and also we had a discussion within the Supreme Court for basic income of citizenship now. And I'm telling this because I think it is really important to stress the emergency aid as one of the most effective, and also it is actually the largest cash transfer in Brazilian history, considering both the number of beneficiaries, the size of the budget allocated, and the value of the benefit. So the emergency aid war, the first, we divided in 3 emergency aid. 2020 was the first emergency aid from April to August. September to December, we have the extension, and now 2021, we have the 2021 emergency aid, and now our president yesterday just issued a decree, extended it for more 3 months in 2021 due to the hardship on most vulnerable people here in Brazil. So what are the numbers, for instance? In the first emergency aid, we had 68 million citizens were eligible for emergency aid, which directly and indirectly benefited almost 120 million people, which represent 56% of the Brazilian population. And we are gathering here also people that were most vulnerable during the pandemic, people who work in the informal labor market, have low and uncertain incomes, unemployed, and do not count of any form of protection against crisis. So the government established this exceptional social protection measure, which is the emergency aid, during the pandemic, and then it became almost 2 years now in a row. And with the extension until August, November, and December, and August until August, September and October of this year now. And it is important also to stress, I don't know what's my time here, The moderator just tell me. So if I have to put
Yes,
forward.
you can conclude if you want.
Okay, no, just if I can export some things, or if I have to pass it through, because I think it's 2 to 5 minutes, isn't it? So don't take all the time. But I mean, it is really important to stress that the emergency aid in Brazil, with these big numbers and being the largest cash transfer in Brazilian history, we had invested almost 3 billion reais in this the emergency aid, and the Bolsa Família beneficiaries, because we had 3 target groups. 2 of them were already registered in the single registry, which is Cadastro Único. Both Bolsa Família beneficiaries and the other beneficiaries from other social programs that were not eligible for Bolsa Família. But there was also this target group, a large amount of our target group here, which were included through intensive use of technology, through an app. And so we could then cross-check the data inside and give the benefit. And this was the largest amount. Almost 48% of the emergency aid beneficiaries were from this group. And we call this people who were called invisible to the social assistance registry. So through the use of technology, it was really important to have this target group, especially regarding the unemployed and informal workers. It is important to stress also that the emergency benefit model has incorporated throughout its implementation lessons learned and increased the transparency of public transfer. We had a lot of institutional agreement on the federal level, but also a social network of protection that was established so we could do the payment roles. It was really important to say that we had an active accountability, improved targeting of the policy, so the focalization, and monthly review of the eligibility criteria together with all the institutions. So we had around 19 agreements with all the institutions, judicial institutions, and database institutions. And so we could cross-check the data and monthly review the eligibility criteria. So this is really important to stress because it was a massive instrumentalization of this policy in Brazil. So it was an effort with an institutional level that required actually a higher level of decision making. So we had a risk management committee inside the ministry that internal and external control organs were also participating in the discussion, and it was really important. So these improvements were built through the implementation of the emergency aid. Since the law, we had 6 days after the law was enacted in Brazil, the emergency aid law, we had the first payments. So the improvements were built through the implementation of the policy in a very transparent way with our control organs, which was really important because we had reevaluation of the eligibility status of the beneficiaries every month to check if the person has a formal job or is receiving social assistance or social security benefits. This in order to ensure that the emergency benefits is focused on the poorest. So it is important also to say that the legacy of the emergency aid still is an ongoing policy, but we can have some lessons learned. For instance, we had a mass inclusion of the beneficiary population in the banking system. So we had almost resulting about almost 49 million new saving accounts. So promoting financial inclusion of millions of Brazilians that were living in poverty or extreme poverty. And this tackles also ongoing studies that we are having with another development banks or the World Bank, for instance, to assess better possibilities of financial products and financial education for the Bolsa Família population, for instance. So this mass inclusion of beneficiaries in the banking systems also comes with broader possibilities of financial products and financial education to these beneficiaries. So things to consider also for the future. I'm wrapping up here. So
thank you very much.
Yes, and also it is important that in the post-COVID era, we need to strengthen social protection together with income transfer, strengthening with social policy integration. So in the post-pandemic context, the situation, the economic situation will remain challenging, and in particular, the need of the nutritional security of most vulnerable countries, such as Latin America countries. And after the end of the installment of that it's an emergency policy. So among other measures, it is important to emphasize the need to improve the Bolsa Família, which is our cash transfer, mainly cash transfer program in Brazil, to ensure that all eligible families are served, and this has a budgetary constraint. So this is for the last question. Update the poverty line and the average value of the program benefit. We have a very an age policy poverty line here in Brazil, so we need to update it. Simplify the program benefit basket with a focus on early childhood, strengthening social assistance services, and expand the use of technology to improve the expand of our single register. Those are all efforts that we are already tackling in Brazil in order to guarantee the improvement of the situation of the poverty and the extreme poverty population here in Brazil. And this is just food for thought and experience for that Brazil has faced. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Luciana. Indeed, the case of Brazil is always big in terms of numbers, but it's very impressive what you have achieved with this emergency program that was put together in very, very short time. We give the floor to Colombia, Laura Milena Pavón Alvarado, Director of Social Development at the National Planning Department of Colombia. Please try to stick to 3 to 5 minutes so that we can really have a short interventions, and then we can come to the second round of discussion.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation to this conversation, to this webinar. For the first question only, I would like to start to give you a brief context of our social protection system and state the main challenges that we are now facing for the implementation of our social protection system. I would like to start by saying that we are now celebrating 30 years since our political constitution was issued, and this constitution laid the groundwork for the building and for the implementation of our social security and our social protection system. And it has also been almost 20 years since the passing of the law in 2002 that created our social protection system. It's been 20 years. This is a system that was grounded in Colombia on the concept of social risk management, which recognizes that all individuals, all households are exposed to different shocks, such as sickness, unemployment, old age, and that they require of different mechanisms to manage and to mitigate the risk that could otherwise affect the income and the well-being of households. Our social protection system in Colombia integrates different interventions which aims to mitigate the main risks faced by households. But despite the progress that we have on the legal framework, the progress with the implementation of some income support programs for the poor, our conditional cash transfer programs, and more recently, our unconditional cash transfers, including the VAT compensation and Ingreso Solidario that covers about 3 million households. But in the face of the worst economic crisis in decades, the results achieved by the social protection system are still insufficient. And we have a large share of households and workers excluded from the social protection system who lacks the right mechanisms to manage and face all type of risks. In terms of, for example, of unemployment, that has been one of the main risks suffered by workers, only 1% of unemployed workers are covered by el mecanismo de protección al cesante, by unemployment protection mechanisms, which is the main instrument for protection against unemployment, but targets a very small segment of formal workers with stable jobs, creating a high exclusion in Colombia. And this crisis has also exposed that the country lacks from adequate mechanism for protection of workers against unemployment, such as unemployment insurance schemes. In the case of risk for old age, only 25% of elderly receive a pension, a contributory pension. But this coverage will tend to decrease in the coming years, since there is a high share of informal workers who are not making contributions to Social Security. So these results of low access, low coverage, the quality of our social protection system could be related to a poor understanding of the risks suffered by households, their nature, and from linking all those social protection instruments and interventions to the labor status of workers, to formal workers. And also these results are associated to a poor performance of the labor market that exhibits a high unemployment, informal employment rates, high segmentation between formal and informal workers, and high exclusion of informal workers from social protection benefits. So those are the two challenges that we have. And just to finish, any proposal to improve our social protection system should go along with some labor market reforms that takes into account the labor codes, some that takes into account the distortion that some of the instruments in regulation introduced to the labor market. These reforms should aim to reduce unemployment and informal employment. And for this is very important. It's important to build a new integrated vision of what the social protection system and its financing should be. And this will be part of the main recommendation from the employment mission that is currently underway in Colombia. We'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is very interesting, and how you point out the challenge of linking these social protection systems with the employment packages and the labor market in general, which is the greatest challenge. Let's give the floor now to Chile. Elias Tefarikis, Representative Executive Director of the Program of Social Protection Network at the Ministry of Development and Family of Chile. Thank you, Elias, for being with us.
Well, thank you, Jose Antonio. Thanks for the OECD for having me here. Thanks for the invitation. So the first thing that I want to share with you is that, to be honest, we've been working a lot. We are tired. I mean, the pandemic has been hard with many of us, probably in all the countries. It sounds obvious, but to be honest with you guys, that's the first thing. We don't have all the solutions. We have more answers in more questions in the countries. And let's put that in place. I mean, on the table, in Latin America, in Europe, in the US, and Canada, in many countries, COVID-19 has been a huge challenge in social protection network and in other things. And I want to say that because I think that's a huge learning from probably the OECD, the IDB, World Bank, and so many institutions in the country that are helping us to do and to improve the challenges that we have. The second one is that we had big challenges before the pandemic, and now with pandemic, we have even more greater challenges. I think that's in terms of social policies, we have more work to do, and that's fine for me to put it in that way, but it's a lot of things that we have to do. And the other thing that is very obvious, but we should say, is that the future of work, it's already here. I mean, with the COVID-19, we have a huge and a more important challenge in that way. I'm talking about upskilling, reskilling, and social protection systems need to think and work with other ministries in that areas. In Chile, and I think in other countries in Latin America, we use this expression of you need to think and chew gum while you are walking, because you need to think in different ways to find different solutions. And one of that is that we've been working very hard is our social protection network. And in one side, of course, is to develop new benefits and new services for citizens. But the other one, and for us is very important, is more in the service design area, in more like in the social innovation area, which means that how can we use technology to approach those people, for those citizens that are in vulnerable situations, and help them to apply for a benefit, or at least to get a benefit. I'm talking about to use a simple vocabulary, to use innovative tools to reach them through those cell phones, through using networks or things like that. And we are working very hard on that. Today, the Social Protection Network is a program that is helping us to do that in terms of how we coordinate the benefits and the offer of the Chilean government and the states, and put that to the citizens in an easy way, something understandable, something that they can use easily from their phones, and to access to benefits. That's, I think, that's one of the key elements. It's one of the not probably the most important learning, but one of the relevant learnings that we have is how you approach to citizens in a different way, especially in pandemic times, and that's a huge learning as well. The other one, and I think this is also like our colleague from Brazil was talking about, in Chile we have implemented the Emergency Family Income, it's IFE, which is of course, is not the solution for everything. It's an emergency income that has been helping us to help people, especially the more vulnerable people. In the last month, it has become an universal income, so it's been helping us to reach those families. Just to give you some number, in June, we reached 14.5 million people with this income, emergency income. Chile has a population of 19 million people. So in terms of direct transfer, of course, it's been the huge and the most relevant transfer in the state of in the history of Chile, that's for sure. But, and it's more or less $2,900 million just in June. So it's a lot of money for a developing country like Chile. But that gives you just the intensity of the challenges of social protection networks. And probably the other thing that we need to use, and it's just a suggestion probably, is that open innovation challenges for social protection world are very relevant. We need to bring the private sector in these challenges. I mean, we need to work with them in a more collaborative way. And there are a lot of instruments to use now. There are many initiatives like GovTech, open calls and things like that. And social protection networks, in my point of view and in our point of view, need to bring also the private sector to find the best solutions. You have entrepreneurs, you have innovators working on the field, and probably with easiest and better solutions, even than many states. So just a couple of ideas to share and the experiences that we have here in Chile.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting also what you mentioned in the case of Chile, and how you have been able to provide this universal income, well, 14 million people of emergency income, which is really an effort. And as you were saying at the beginning, really a recognition to all of those that have been on the front line, like all of you, trying to cope with these decisions on how to expand these projects. Let's go now to our colleagues from either academia or international institutions. They might have a broader picture about what is happening in the region. And let's start with Hugo Ñopo, a principal investigator of analysis for the development group, GRADE. Bienvenido, Hugo.
Muchas gracias, José Antonio. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to this conversation, which I believe is one of the fundamental topics that lies at the core of our development problem, the intersection between social protection and labor markets and productivity. This is certainly one of the key elements we need to discuss for the region and for the developing world in terms of how is the status quo not providing that social protection that we need to the majority of the population. What are the fundamental changes we need to implement in our region? But before implementing them, we have to think about them. We have to put a lot of brain in terms of what's working, what's not, and what do we need to do. And so in that sense, I'm very, very happy to be in this conversation. I thank the OECD for pushing this conversation, not only today. I remember being in March this year, having a similar conversation regarding the Latin American economic outlook and discussing some of the elements that I will try to point out in the discussion today as well. I have two comments to start with this morning. Let me share with you a chart. My two comments are the first one about the undesirable equilibrium that James was telling us about. And let me point an extra set of elements of this undesirable equilibrium. We have this undesirable equilibrium such that the number or the percentage of people covered by social security systems is just too low. We have too low coverage. An extra element of this is that not only we're having very, very low coverage, but also we're covering exactly those who will need the least of that coverage. And this is a chart that will clearly set the point. I want you to see here the 10 deciles of income distribution in Peru, a representative country of our region. And the bars here represent different components of family income. The two blue bars are labor income. The two green bars are transfers. And within labor income, we distinguish formal and informal labor income. And within transfers, we distinguish between public and private transfers. So how do the poor make a living in our region? Well, half of their earnings comes from transfers, and the other half comes from labor, but only informal labor. Formality is non-existent among them. Formality will start to appear as we move up in the income ladder, such that for the richest decile, around 2/3 of their earnings, of their family income, comes from formal labor. So this regressivity of formal labor income is an additional special feature of this undesirable equilibrium that we want to think about. Especially those that we will like to protect, those that we will like to socially protect, are absolutely uncovered by this setting of having this social protection being delivered through the labor markets. So this is the first comment I wanted to make. The second comment I would like to raise here is about some extra limitations of the design of this model of delivering social protection through the labor markets. And for this, I would like to recall that this is a system that was designed for some European societies almost a century ago. Latin America now is substantially different from that, not only in terms of time, but also in regional terms. The first element I would like to raise is that these social protection systems were designed such that in every household there was an income earner, a person who will make the living for the family, and so through his job, that person will be protected and will cover the whole family through the system. The idea behind that was this idea of one worker per family, one worker per household. And so that worker, that income earner will cover everybody from his coverage through his job. This reality is not there anymore. Now in most of the households in our region, there are more than one income earner. So who should be the person designed to be entitled to the benefits and to share those benefits to everybody in the household is not a clear, has not a clear answer. And it's not economically rational to ask everybody to be registered in the social security system in order to deliver social protection to all household members. This is something we need to rethink about this structure of the households. And in similar lines about this same comment, there are new elements of the new labor markets that we have to incorporate into these systems. Nowadays, in Peru, for instance, 1 out of 6 workers in Peru will hold more than one job. And what happens when you hold more than one job? Should you pay Social Security from the first job, from the second, from both? Is it necessary to pay from both if you are having the same coverage? So those are elements that were not part of a problem 100 years ago in Europe, but now they are becoming to be part of this problematic that we have, that we want to think about, and we need to resolve. We need to fix this. Should we mandate all to pay for Social Security coverage from all their jobs? Isn't it enough to pay just for one? Then the question becomes, from which one? And so, as you can tell, there are many open questions that we need to think about. Let me close with this at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugo. I guess you touched exactly the core of this discussion of what is the type of design we need for a region that combines this informality and formality and this regressive situation we have of the formal economy. Thank you very much. Very, very useful, your intervention. Let's go now to Fabio Betranu, Director, Decent Work Team and Country Office for the South Cone or Latin America of the ILO. Thank you, Fabio, for being with us.
Thank you very much, Jose. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Happy to be here sharing some ideas. And I'm very happy that Luciana, Laura, and Elias started the discussion because it's important to think, to listen what are the current issues and problems. And so my first comment deal with emergency. We are still suffering the consequences of this unprecedented crisis. And this relates to the slide that Jens proposed as issues. And I think that the first issue that he challenges us to think about is the high charges on formal labor and the shift towards general taxation revenues and the opportunities for more redistribution. I think that these are important things that we need to discuss, but I think that first we need to focus in the measures and how we are dealing with the crisis. So I think my first comments had to be with these issues. The second thing that I want to say is that we need to be very careful doing generalizations because the situation in each country is quite different. It depends the history of social protection, how this has evolved, how mature is the system, and the ability and the performance of the labor market. I think that Laura mentioned this in the case of Colombia, and of course the performance of the fiscal space and the public finances. And so we know that we are in a very heterogeneous region, and Luciana told us about this very important, this incredible auxilio emergencial in Brazil, and that I guess few countries would have been able to implement this type of response in the region. So I think that we need to keep in mind this. My second set of comments has to do with the emergency, and for the second question, I will be glad to comment on more on the structural problems. And I think this is very important what Elias and Luciana and Laura said about these emergency programs. And I think that the first challenge is how we maintain the financing of these schemes because the crisis will be with us and the recovery of employment will take at least between 2 and 5 years. So we need to strengthen the financing of this type of programs. And at the same time, I think that the second challenge is how we are dealing with this program and transforming this program. And I think that the 3 cases show these adaptations, and we need to link this to what is going on in the labor market. And we know that there was a massive withdrawal from the labor market, particularly women, and we need to recover employment. We need to recover the path of re-entry to the labor market, and we need a better recovery. And I think that there were some suggestions in terms of how we redesign this program, these cash programs to provide income security to vulnerable families, but we need to reconnect these programs or redesign this program to what we call the essential services, public employment programs, public employment services, vocational training, and how we redesign all these programs that provide digital abilities and other abilities that are requiring this transformation that we see in the productive sector. So I think that our main focus should be to focus in this transformation that we need for these emergency programs. We have a lot of experience from other crises, but these crises have some particularities, some specific characteristics that have affected particularly the informal sector, informal employment, particularly women and the youth. So I think that we need to think in an open box. Elias mentioned bring the private sector. Luciana said how technology and how connecting with the financial sector is important. We have all this transformation in the platform economy. So I think that this should be our main focus in terms of how we adapt these emergency programs to the need of recover employment. So this would be my first comments, and we'll be glad to discuss the other structural problems later on. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Very interesting how you frame exactly the challenges that we have with this high informal labor and the opportunities for redistribution. This is precisely, and I'm glad that you mentioned that the country's perspective first was a good way to hear first what they have been doing. And as we were saying with Chile, it's really a lot of merit what they have been doing in this emergency situation. Let's go to the last speaker from ECLAC, Alberto Arenas. A pleasure to have you with us, Alberto.
Thank you, Jose Antonio. Good morning to everyone in Latin America and the Caribbean. Good afternoon in Europe. No? I would like to thank the OECD and the European Union for this invitation to participate in this important event. And a special greeting to the representatives of the countries, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, and the panelists, Hugo and Fabio. And in these 5 minutes, I will try to deliver the main message that we have been working at ECLAC in universal, comprehensive, and sustainable social protection system. Despite the efforts made the region over the past 2 decades to expand social protection coverage, countries are facing the pandemic with wide gaps and large unprotected population groups, which highlight the fragmentation and inequalities of their social protection system and the historical weaknesses of the welfare state in the region. As we have argued in our 2020 report, Building a New Future, the development of the welfare state with a universal, comprehensive, and sustainable social protection system is a great pending task facing the region's countries. The structural problem of Latin American countries, such as informality and high inequality, and the lack of social protection and fragmented health system, explain much of the health results we have seen in the region during the pandemic. in terms of higher level of contagious and death. Our region, for example, has 8.4% of world population, but it represents 20% of confirmed COVID-19 infections and 32% of death for COVID-19. The pandemic has challenged the health system in the region, which were fragmented, unequal, and underfunded. Even though government had made efforts to increase its public spending on health, it is on average 3.7% of GDP. A figure that remains far from the target of 6% of GDP recommended by the Pan American Health Organization, with a significant problem of allocations in, for example, on the funding for primary care, which does not reach the recommended benchmark of at least 30% of the public health expenditure. The region has experienced an increase in poverty and extreme poverty. In 2020, the extreme poverty rate was 12.5%, while the poverty rate was 33.7% of the population. Poverty and extreme poverty in Latin America have thus reached level in 2020 that has not been seen in the last 12 and 20 years. And furthermore, in 2020, 490 million Latin Americans, 79% of the population were vulnerable, living with incomes up to 3 times the poverty lines. Governments in Latin America have indeed introduced several emergency social protection response, as Luciana, Laura, and Elias have mentioned. In 2020, 32 Latin Americans and Caribbean countries adopted 263 emergency social protection measures, including cash transfer programs. Cash transfer covered about 50% of the region population, with spending at 1.6% of GDP. The social protection emergency response from government have prevented a further increase in poverty and extreme poverty. The projection made by ECLAC indicates that the poverty rate in 2020 decreased 3.5% point due to the emergency transfers implemented by the government in the region. Social protection policies are sometimes treated as though they were potentially inefficient compensation mechanisms liable to create dependency on public policy and jeopardize the sustainability of public finance. However, as we argued in our 2018 report, the inefficiency of inequality, the reality shows that non-contributory cash transfer have had large effects on the school enrollment, attendance, progress and retention, and have helped to improve access to health services. As regards employment, they do not discourage participation in the workforce at the household level and may even encourage it. Thus, social protection can also yield growth boosting productivity gains. It is possible to create a virtuous circle between social protection and labor inclusion and productivity. Finally, as we are still in the midst of the pandemic, it is important to stress that in the absence of solid welfare state, emergency social protection measures need to be adapted, maintained, and extended. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. I guess your intervention precisely is a very good transition to the next discussion on how can we finance this universal social protection system. Universal sounds very interesting, well, very attractive as a policy goal, but at the same time, countries are facing a short fiscal space and a number of restrictions that doesn't allow at this moment in the region to expand the full universal social protection system. So this is precisely the question of, in this difficult context, how can we finance the expansion of social protection systems? So if you allow, let's start again now with the panelists from different institutions, Hugo, Fabio, and Alberto, and then we give the floor to countries to tell us also what they have been doing on their side. So in the same order, we can start with Hugo. what are the alternatives you have seen, Hugo, of how we can finance the expansion of social protection systems?
Well, it's not easy. It's not simple at all. Before deciding how to finance and how to move the money from one account to the other, we have to have a real discussion, a real big picture discussion of what are the rights and who are the entitled, who is entitled to what right. Social protection should be a right for workers or should be a right for citizens? Do we want to protect workers or do we want to protect citizens? And this is important. These are part of the fundamental questions I was referring to before. When we think about citizens, we are closer to the goal of protecting all, especially in such informal countries as ours. And when we think about protecting all citizens, we have to start thinking about eliminating overlaps. Overlaps, for instance, in health coverage. This is an example I have for health coverage. What we have here is individuals in all percentiles of the income distribution in Peru. And what we are measuring here on the y-axis is different sorts of coverage for these individuals. The yellow line is private coverage. The red line is e-salud coverage, which is the coverage that is meant to be achieved through the labor markets, but it covers, as I was telling you before, in a very, very non-progressive way. And the black line corresponds to the Seguro Integral de Salud, a non-contributory health coverage. Then the sum of all of them, the summatory of all of them will be the blue line here. And an interesting element to take away from this chart is that when we think about these different sorts of coverages, the poor will get covered through some systems specially designed for them. On the other extreme, the rich will get covered through their money, their earnings, their ways of getting coverage. And we typically tend to forget the missing middle. The missing middle will have the lowest coverage here. And here I'm talking about for individuals between the 50th and perhaps 80th percentile. Those are the individuals who will have the lowest coverage in terms of health insurance in this particular example. And so my basic point here is to think about this universality in terms of citizens and not workers, and through this eliminating overlaps to save from this overlap elimination and designing a simple yet more efficient system for all.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting indeed. This issue of the missing middle is very important point that you are highlighting. It's obviously a challenge, but it happens as well with this issue of taxation. No? The last part of the sides have an account or in the tax system. They always have an account in the social protection system, and there's this middle that doesn't necessarily have an account anywhere. The invisible, as Brazil was mentioning before. Let's move to, let me just move a little bit to Fabio Betranu from ILO.
Okay, thank you, Jose. I would like to do two comments or remarks on the idea of how we rethink financing of social protection. And I think that we need to be very careful of what we are talking about within the social protection system, because rethinking financing of health is different than rethinking financing on pensions or other social risks. And the dimensions are very different. One thing is to think about financing of a universal pension. The magnitudes are enormous. Other thing is to think about universal protection for safety and health, to recover employment and to make workers more confident that they can return to work, and firms to be more able and engage in hiring new workers. So there are different dimensions that we're talking about. And I think that we can discuss, and I will be happy to discuss the new ways of financing expansions on health with general taxation. But I think that talking about general taxation for pensions is different. I think that we think we need to rethink about this idea of giving up contributory contributions. And I think that the experience in many Latin American countries show that giving up contributory components or financing of pensions does not necessarily imply more and better employment or more formality. We can see the history of Chile in the 80s, where contributions were reduced, and this was not, this didn't create more employment and create a long-term financing problem for the pension system as we are looking today. In the case of Argentina, Uruguay, eliminating contributions for pensions created a fiscal deficit, and this created macroeconomic instability. So I think that we need to be very careful on this idea of substituting contributory financing by general taxation. And also we have this redistributive or the considerations that Jan's proposed in his initial presentation, substituting contributory components by general taxation could create potentially some regressive gains in the system. So I think that these is a very challenging issue. We need to discuss very careful. We need to separate what we are talking about in terms of the different social protection programs. One thing is social insurance, other things are general social assistance programs. And finally, I think that we need to rethink about the financing of unemployment insurance protection or protection for working age population. And the crisis have shown that a major weakness that we have in social protection system is in this area of the social protection schemes. And now we have a discussion in several countries, Paraguay, Uruguay, Peru, that are discussing the idea of introducing an employment insurance scheme. I think that there are opportunities to discuss the financing of some specific branches of social protection that I think that are very specific. So I finish with these two reflections and be happy to contribute later on. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you. Thank you for precisely making this distinction of sometimes we use social protection in very general terms, but there are different parts of it and different ways in which we can finance these different elements. So this is precisely part of the puzzle that needs to be solved. But this issue of employment insurance is also, as you say, a very critical element that our region compared to other regions really lacks. And I hope that countries can really advance in that front. Let's hear from Alberto from CEPAL also. What is the perspective on the financing? Because you mentioned this issue of more universal social protection, but obviously that is a very, very important task in terms of financing in a moment that countries are not precisely abundant in terms of resources.
Okay.
Yes, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Jose Antonio. First of all, I would like to say that more than half of the workers in the region are engaged in the informal sector with low labor incomes, precarious occupation, and without access to social protection. Informal sector workers are those hardest hit by job losses and the reduction of incomes during the pandemic. Before the crisis, because of high levels of labor informality, only 47% of employees person were affiliated with or contributed to pension system, and 60% were affiliated with or contributed to health system. Therefore, the the challenges are not only related to the financial sustainability, but also to the coverage level and the sufficient of the benefits of social protection system in the region. Well, another topic is social expenditure. In Latin America and the Caribbean, central government social spending increased in 2018 from 8.5% to 11.3% of GDP, but it still lags far behind from social spending in OECD countries, both relatively and in absolute terms. Along with other factors, this means that welfare regimes in the region are insufficiently redistributed and that very high level of inequality. The pandemic is a critical juncture and that is redefining what is possible, and it opens a window of opportunity to redistribute the resources and opportunities for the recognition of identities and rights, and to achieve the transformative recovery with equality and sustainability. And in the face of the exceptional situations such as the pandemic and the citizen demand for more egalitarian society with a full guarantee of right, there is an opportunity for change. And to take advantage of this opportunity, a new social compact is urgently needed as a political instrument for real structural change to the development model, to ensure a new democratic and inclusive social compact, social policies implemented to build the welfare state, but be based on a right basis and gender approach and sensible to difference in order to address the discrimination of different group population. And social compacts are a key tool to move toward universal, comprehensive, and sustainable social protection system. Promoting universal social protection and a stronger and more efficient welfare state is essential to reduce social tensions and feelings of injustice and abuse without our societies, as well as to foster a sense of belonging. And a necessary condition for new social contracts is a fiscal compact. That is maybe very related to the question that we are debating right now. And this fiscal compact to ensure a financial sustainability of public action and the financial sustainability of the social protection system, while at the same time providing basic social and public service for all. And the sustainability of social protection system that include adequate coverage, sufficiency of benefits, and financial sustainability. These three dimensions are necessary to achieve the sustainability of social protection system to move toward a universal system in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, well, this is what everybody is talking now about the possibility of a broad discussion in the countries about the new social contract, and this, as you said, will require a broad consensus if we are going to finance in a different way a social protection with greater capacity for the population. Let's now hear from the countries themselves what they have been doing in this regard. Let's hear first from Luciana from Brazil.
Thank you. Well, this is very interesting and 100 million question, the second one, how to finance. It's a very hard to think ways to finance the expansion of social protection system with informality as high as Latin American countries and also with limited physical space. But I think that in Brazil, bringing again the experience of the emergency aid, what we can learn from it also is that in 2020, the government declared state of public health emergency of national importance. This in February. Then in March, the National Congress issued a legislative decree to allow the increase in public spending beyond current limits until the end of 2020. Then we had the creation of the emergency aid law in April. In September, we established the extension of it. And then in March 2021, we had the establishment of the new emergency aid. All this was really important to say that it was also using a provisional measure with extraordinary credits. Since we also had, so this is also a political decision together with the fiscal and budgetary constraint due to the crisis, but also the importance and the need to help the most vulnerable population in need that were above the poverty and extreme poverty line, especially. And now, in the case of the emergency aid, also the unemployed, the non-formal workers, and the people who applied through the app. So it was really, like I said, very important, the intensive use of technology in this regard. But this made us, for instance, just for you to sense, if the 14 million beneficiary from the families from Bolsa Familia had not been benefited by the emergency aid, they would receive on average 191 reais in benefits. But then it increases up to 550% to 1,018, around 1,000 payment of the emergency aid. This is the average benefit of the program. So we were talking about in the beginning of 2020, an average benefit per capita, 119 in benefit. Then with the emergency aid, it increased to 1,000, so 500 more. And now on emergency aid 2021, we are around 250 reais because the benefits in each of the emergency aid were lower. So it's still, we have an increase of the benefit per capita, per family. So just in the public of the Bolsa Familia, and we had 3 different target groups. It has an impact on the budgetary of the Bolsa Familia program for the next 2 years. And we have the law, the budgetary law each year to be passed in the Congress. And we have the fiscal constraint. So just to up from 190 reais to 250 with the emergency aid, the average on the benefits per capita, we had a huge amount of impact on the budgetary that we have to solve. So at the end of the pandemic, one of the things that we really have to see is the beneficiaries profile. What are the regions that were most impact on? For instance, we know because Brazil, it's territorially, it's very big. So the Southeast region, the Northeast region, where are the more poorest population? And the age group, we had to 29 to 59 years old, 81% of the people who received the emergency aid were in this age group, which also indicate a high level of informality. We had, as beneficiary by sex, we had 47% as male and 53% as female. We had double quota for single female parent on the emergency aid as well, in order to foster gender equality, and also to have a more gender sensitive approach to the emergency aid. But it's something that we have to consider when creating a legal framework, and we need all institutional arrangements in a governance structure that also combines judiciary, legislative, and executive branches of society. And that's why it's not an easy question, and not an easy, it's an old, not easy question, but in order to expand, but now after not thinking out loud here, but now after the pandemic and the results we had with the emergency aid, by the end of the emergency aid this year, how we can still achieve and reach out to the poorest population, to the most vulnerable one. So it is an imperial need to improve and expand the Bolsa Familia program, to adjust the poverty and extreme poverty line. And also on the emergency aid, we have allocation of extraordinary resources to the new benefits, and now how this can be incorporated within our ordinary resources. So we had to simplify the basket, better focalize the policy. So Bolsa Familia, it is one of the best focalization policy that we had for almost 20 years now. We had, for instance, 0.5% of the GDP just in Bolsa Familia. So this is a very low cost for a high social protection that we can have on this non-contributory benefit cover the active people that are on the line of poverty and extreme poverty. So just some food for thought in order to see the need to improve the Bolsa Familia program, in order to include more families, guarantee the minimal income level to those families, especially after the emergency aid 2000-2001. So those are questions and challenges that Brazil has facing now. And this new social program that has to be emerged within the end of the emergency aid has to combine strengthening social assistance services, inclusion of new families, incorporation of new technology as tools in social protection. And also we had now a discussion within our Supreme Court, a recent decision regarding basic income for all Brazilians. So, and the Bolsa Familia law has a budgetary constraint. So those are all things that we are tackling now. We have extended the emergency aid for more 3 months, but now, by the end of this, we have to combine and emerge in a new, expanded and more improved program, Bolsa Familia program and new social program, in order to tackle all these initiatives, focalizing especially on the emancipation trail of the family and productive inclusion in rural and urban areas. We are talking about financial products, microcredit for extreme vulnerable population. Those are all features in this challenge that we have to tackle. So I think it's a little bit this that I wanted to bring to the discussion. It's a very, very hard question, I think, and for the countries to consider for here on. But income transfer, strengthening with social policy integration, it's very important in order to have a more permanent and robust social program after the post-COVID era. So how to have all these lessons learned for the new program and secure it, to secure basic income, basic citizenship income for all.
Indeed, very many thanks, Luciana. I guess this is you touched also a critical point. No, I guess Bolsa Familia was also an example for many other countries in the region of how to do well focalized projects. But we have this issue, obviously, on the restrictions, how much you focalize or how much you expand to increase the coverage of all others. This is one of the key thresholds or key challenges that countries are facing. Let's hear from Colombia. How have you been dealing with this issue of financing the expansion of social protection, Laura?
Well, thank you. Well, in terms of finances, we have some fiscal restrictions. We struggle a lot to try to finance expansion of social protection, including the conditional and the unconditional cash transfers programs. But I think it is important to associate the source of funding with the nature and source of each risk. And that's what I mentioned in my first intervention, that our social protection system is based on a concept of social risk management. I would dare to say the following, but based on our reflections in Colombia to make some contributions to these discussions. But all those risks which are affecting the general population should be financed by general taxation. And all those risks associated to a labor relationship should be financed by workers and employers' contributions. But this was not the case in Colombia, and part of the reason is because our social protection system has been built in a very fragmented way without an holistic approach or a vision. And in fact, the social protection system was built based on what already existed, such as the healthcare system. The funding, for example, of our healthcare system generates some distortions in the labor market, some segmentation even between formal and informal workers, and it also creates an incentive for informal workers to remain in the subsidized health scheme rather than in the contributory one. And we also have the missing middle that Hugo was also explaining. But these are some initial ideas and we need further discussion for that. One last comment on the political economy. And one important lesson that we have drawn from the political situation that the country, that Colombia has experienced on the past 2 months, and is that to move forward with reforms that seek to address fundamental or structural problems, like reforms on labor market or on financing of social protection benefits, you have to build consensus at various levels of the society. You must build a new path or a new social contract in which all groups agree with the new vision of the social protection system and everything that the implementation of the system implies, including the finances. I'll stop here, thank you.
Thank you very much. So yes, well, this is the critical issue, the political economy, and as you say, it's not only Colombia. All the Latin American countries have had a number of tensions in the past few months, and precisely because the pandemic kind of came on top of many of the vulnerabilities that many of these people already had. And as Eklak was saying recently, many more people joined the poverty lines. And this is the critical situation we have. Let's finish with Elias from Chile on your perspective on this issue of the financing. Let me invite those that are hearing this webinar. There might not be a lot of time for question and answers, but if you have anything to raise, you can use the question and answer button at the bottom. Elias, please.
Yeah, thanks for Jose Antonio. Of course, it's a difficult question, but I would say that we have an opportunity as a country. The discussion of a new constitution has begun 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, 2 days ago. And this is, I think, it's a new opportunity as a country to think a new pact in terms of social protection, in terms of how we can finance this, or in terms of how we can understand social protection, social rights related with the type of country that we want to build for the next X years. You know, I don't know for how many years, but of course, this is, I think it's an opportunity. Of course, it's not a specific, a concrete answer in terms of how we're going to finance this, but it's a relevant and a good opportunity in my point of view. And obviously, we need to think that all this social support, especially, for example, the emergency income, we don't have the fiscal opportunity to do this for so many years. I mean, we need to understand that that's realities for the emergency. We need to understand how to build a better protection system with other finance alternatives in that point of view, in that way. And there are some ideas that many people and some experts have been discussing in this thing. For example, like better or more efficient measures against tax evasion could be an opportunity to think this. Improve on reallocation and public spending. That's also a way that you can find solutions to this. But of course, in terms of the COVID-19 emergency, we're going to have to find new ways of finance social protections. And I think, of course, it's not just one of the solutions. It's an opportunity to discuss this. The new constitution or the new discussion of the constitution is opening an opportunity for discuss that. And especially now that we are going to have like so many countries in Latin America and other countries in other parts of the world, but our last measures about poverty, of course, are not good results in terms of, for example, yesterday we knew that the results of the CASM survey, which measured, poverty, and we unfortunately have an increase compared with what happened in 2017. And people in extreme poor, it's 4.3%, and non-extreme poor is 6.6%. And just to be specific with the figures, this represents an increase compared to what happened in 2017, when poverty rate was 8.6% and extreme poverty rate was 2.3%. So of course we have a challenge in this, because the emergency has been hard, not just in Chile, it's been hard in many countries. So those are my comments for that question.
Thank you very much. Well, with this, we finish these two questions that certainly put the issues. At the same time, as somebody said, we have still many open questions. I have there was one question here in the Q&A of what are the next steps. We will address this precisely in the last section. But if there's no other question, any additional comment, let's give the floor to Sebastián Nieto and Jens Arnold, that are part of this project, and to give their own reflections about how this discussion that has just happened, and how we will take this forward in the next step. So Sebastián, please, if you might want to start.
Thank you, Jose Antonio. Let me first thank all the participants. I think that we had a lot of good thoughts about this discussion and about how to move forward this project. I think that the interventions from several countries, I mean Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, were very important to see what they have in the pipeline, and in particular the challenge that they see for the financing. And certainly, I mean, the ILO with Fabio, our friend Alberto from the CLAC, and Hugo Ñopo from GRADE were certainly important to see as well the perspective that they have in this topic. First point that I want to highlight is the number that we have at the Development Center on the workers without any labor-based social insurance and main social assistance schemes before the pandemic. We were talking about close to 40% of workers that they were not protected by any kind of safety net. So that's a message that is related to that some of you mentioned, Laura from Colombia and Fabio from the ILO, the weak social protection system that we had in Latin America before the pandemic. Second aspect is the high heterogeneity that we have in the region. That's something that Fabio mentioned. That's something that is really important. When we talk about, in particular, the percentage of the population covered before the pandemic, we see an important difference between Uruguay, for instance, where the coverage is quite high in terms of social protection or social assistance, respect to El Salvador or Honduras, where close to 20% of the population was only covered by this kind of system. So that's a second important message. The third message that I see is still to think about the emergency in the region, how to continue with these programs to protect the most vulnerable populations. So I think that's an important issue, because still we have the social crisis in Latin America, even if we see now some positive numbers in terms of income, but still the social impact of this crisis is still in the region. The fourth element that I see is the consideration to take into account when we talk about these social protection systems. What Elias mentioned about how to involve the private sector, that's something very important to think about. The use of new technologies, how to coordinate across different social security registries, Luciana mentioned, and we did actually a seminar on this in the framework of the Laguna program, and that's something that we did together with Brazil. Another element, very important, how to finance the social protection systems. First, when we talk about social protection systems, so how to finance this is about health, it's about pensions, it's about insurance. So that's a point that Fabio mentioned. It's a fair point, and that we need to think about the financing from the different elements behind the social protection systems and the linkages that we have on how to promote formalization. Here, let me highlight 3 elements. The role of general taxes. That's something that certainly is important. The second one is the mise en middle that Hugo mentioned, and something related to this, the non-labor cost to formalize. That's something that we did some time ago with our report on taxing wages in Latin America, the huge cost to formalize in Latin America for the workers in the informal workers in the region. So that's something closely related to the tax base. That's a high cost that you can have in terms of formalization. So when we think about the fiscal reforms, we need to think as well on the cost of formalization, how it's going to affect this. Let me finish with a crucial point that Alberto mentioned, but also Laura and then Elias about the new social contract that we need in Latin America. At the end, there is a need for consensus. That's something that Laura highlighted. The sequencing of policies, these things are crucial. And when we talk about the social contract, so it's part of the process that I mentioned, the consensus and the sequencing, and then the elements, the fiscal, the social protection. But something that we didn't talk in this webinar, but of course is complementary to this, is the productive strategy that we can have to create formal jobs. Because at the end, we need to create the conditions to create the formal jobs in Latin America. So these are some of the takeaways that we had in this webinar, in my sense, and these are important for this project, certainly. It's important for the work that we are doing on informality at the household level. That's a report that we are going to publish in a couple of months. And certainly these are important as well for the Latin American Economic Outlook 2021, that we are going to have the launch in September 2021 with our friends of the ECLAC, the European Commission and the CAF. So thanks a lot for all these messages that we had from countries, from the experts, that certainly can help for the next steps of this project that Jens certainly gonna give the main steps on this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sebastian. Jens.
Yes, thank you so much, Sebastian, for these remarks. And, I can only echo what you said, that, we are really grateful to all the participants today. It's been so great that we were able to pick your brain on these really novel issues. And, I jotted down a few things that I just want to go through and have some reactions to. I mean, obviously, we can only congratulate many countries in the region, and certainly all those countries represented here today, for the enormous effort and the enormous success that they had with expanding social protection in the crisis. No, I mean, this has been done at record speed. This has been effective, and without it, the crisis would have been much deeper, and the social consequences in particular would have been much more severe. But that still leaves us with the question about, where do we go from here? What are the prospects for sustainability? We somehow will need to reconcile a desirable and probably necessary expansion and coverage of social protection with strained fiscal accounts. So we need to think about this. We need to think about the sustainability dimension of it, because otherwise this will only lead us into the next crisis. And Latin America has had its share of that, and we don't want to go route. So we have to think about this in the context of the fiscal situation that we have. Some countries will have to think about this. Well, actually, most countries in the region have to think about this anyways now after the crisis because of all the additional spending that we've seen. So some countries are already facing the discussion of how do we manage to raise taxes? How do we manage to mobilize new revenues? This is, of course, in many countries in the region, a long-standing problem that has only become more severe now. But we need to think about this anyways. And, in this context, let's include the social dimension. Let's include social protection and how we can think about improving that. And then in some countries, it's not only about revenues. Some countries in the southern part of South America already have revenues that are fairly high. So there, obviously, the dimension of improving the effectiveness of existing spending and rethinking some of the large spending items. I think that will inevitably become part of the question. So I think the issue of technology, which has been mentioned by many participants, this is a very important issue. It's part of why the rapid benefit expansion has been so successful. I don't think Brazil would have been able to roll out the Auxílio Emergencial without use of modern technology. And this has led to improvements in access to banking services. And the same has happened in Chile, the same has happened in Colombia. So these are very positive and useful experiences that we can build on. Then I very much appreciated that Hugo draw the link to productivity. Obviously, we know productivity is a long-standing structural problem of the region, and this is deeply intertwined. You cannot separate one issue from the other. We know that informality is part of the reason why productivity has been so stagnant in many countries. So in a sense, that only underlines, the importance of this. And how do we get there? Well, as Hugo rightly said, maybe not only with a setup that fitted well for a late 19th century European design, that is quite distant from the reality that we are facing now in Latin America. So I also appreciate very much Laura's concrete replies to the question of, do we already have ideas about how we should shift financing burdens, and if so, for what parts and how? And Colombia has had the Misión de Empleo, and that has been looking at this issue, and some of the things that you said, that all risks that affect the general population could be covered by general taxation, whereas what's related to the labor relationship could be covered by contributory elements, by social security contribution. So that, that rings a little bit the bell of the work that Santiago Levy has done, who's been, very, very at the vanguard of this discussion. So thank you very much for bringing this in. And then, of course, the question of how to communicate, how to build consensus for something like that. This is about big changes. No, it goes really to the heart of our social protection system. So we have to not shy away from, proposing things that seem politically difficult at first, but we also have to make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we need to think carefully about the contributions between contributory and non-contributory elements. There are big challenges in how these interactions could work. We need a lot of thinking here. Very grateful that other people are doing thinking on this too. Hugo showed a chart from the recent working paper on Peru that he did in the context of the work by UNDP. Very nice to see that, other international organizations are also thinking in this direction. So let us, join our forces to think about this. Let us not be shy to make bold proposals. After all, what's at stake is really the well-being, the structure of our societies, it's social mobility, it's about where we want to go. So, I think the LAC region has been with Bismarckian social security systems for decades now, and we know that the results leave scope for improvements. So the crisis is really our opportunity now to think about this, to provide new analysis and to come up with new and innovative ideas. And with this project, we hope that we can contribute to that. And on the concrete question of, what are the next steps and where are we going now? Well, we're currently working on analysis and on a report. And we hope that this will see the light of day or the light of the public by the beginning of next year. And at that stage, we would be very happy to engage in another discussion and also, throughout the process. I think if we can all join our forces, then at the end, we can come up with a better outcome and with more policy relevant recommendations. And that is the aim of this. So with this, thank you very much again for your participation, for your thoughtful comments, for your interventions. This has been tremendously helpful for us. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jens, and I join you and Sebastian in thanking everybody for these very relevant and very interesting discussions. I guess it was a very good combination between the perspective from countries and the perspectives from international organizations and academic institutions. So let's, as Jens was saying, we are picking your brains in this first dialogue, but if you have anything to share with us that could be useful for this project, do so. We have our emails in the agenda. And if you don't mind, let me show you very quickly the webpage of the other events we will be organizing on these days. In case, and I put the link in the chat in case any of you might want to join. As I was saying at the beginning, this is a project, a number of projects that we are doing with the European Union. We are here in these challenges of social protection. There was another one at the same time on regional integration, but tomorrow we'll have one very important about healthcare and how to build resilience of the healthcare systems. We will be having others on well-being. There will be 2 cases of countries. Well, a number of launches of reviews, Uruguay and a project on partnerships. So you can see there are others of these dialogues, and if any of you might want to join any of these events, feel free to do so. We will really appreciate different perspectives in these dialogues. So with that, thank you very much to everybody, and we will keep you informed also of how this project evolves, and obviously, as Jens was saying, we'll try to have you back towards the end of this year when the project is concluded and hopefully useful for the countries in the region.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Gracias.
See you. Take care.
Obrigada.
Gracias por la invitación,
Obrigado.
Antonio.
Un abrazo. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. Gracias.
Fabio, cuídate.
Hasta luego, Fabio.
Obrigado, Luciana.
Eu que agradeço. Tchau, tchau.
Sí, muy bien.
Chao.
Muy bien.
Bye.